Welcome to your Emory Henry Reports feature interview. As promised, with me here on the set, Dr. Felicia Mitchell. And Dr. Mitchell, it's such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
And obviously, it's Breast Cancer Awareness Month. I'm wearing my pink tie in sort of in homage a bit, but pink attire can only do so much. I feel that it's the stories such as yours that truly inspire people. So let's just start with the status of your health.
The status of my health is good. You know, one word I learned over the past year is that you're a survivor if you're alive. And so I'm alive today.
That's great. Yeah, well, we're certainly glad to have you back.
I have completed the chemotherapy and the radiation. I'm finishing up one last drug. I'll be finished late November.
That's great. That's
one last chemo drug every 3 weeks.
Well, like I said, obviously you're doing better. You're back on
much
campus.
Better, yeah.
You're writing, you're teaching, doing what you love. How's it feel to be back?
It feels great. But you know, I didn't really leave. I worked through my diagnosis, my surgery, you know, with a few days gone here and there. I worked through December. Then I had the sabbatical, which was a wonderful coincidence. So most of my treatment was in combination with staying home, reading poems, and writing poems. So that was good.
Yeah, you mentioned you are a poet.
Yeah.
You've been a published poet, I think it would be no surprise if your recent experiences have bled through maybe a little bit in your writing.
Oh,
you want to talk about that?
Yes, they have. Yeah. Well, you know, I didn't write immediately about the cancer. I call it the cancer. But in December, I was sitting there with chemo and seeing all these tangled threads, the chemo tubes and my knitting and my iPod wires, and that inspired my first poem. And then my fear about radiation and getting used to doing that every day for 37 days, I think, for straight. I wrote about that. But you know what's more interesting is how it ended up in the poems writing that I wrote about the natural world. You know, I would sometimes use an image from cancer in a poem about something else entirely. So it's there. It has to be there.
Could you give us an example of
an
maybe
example?
You using
Yeah, well,
that comparison?
Yeah. So I wrote a poem about, well, describing my chemo rash. A topic everybody wants to hear. And it began, my chemo rash is not the color of rhododendron, and sort of went from there. So it was a poem about, you know, flowers. It was also about trying to describe the chemo rash through the world of nature, if that makes any sense. But
right.
That's one example.
Okay.
Yeah, or I wrote another poem called Tree Chemo. I was intrigued to learn that trees also get chemo. And that helped me understand a lot. So.
About your understanding of the whole situation in general, let's go back to the beginning. What was it like finding out and just getting started on the treatments?
Well, I got the diagnosis September 1st of last year, the biopsy shortly after that, and every time I got a new test, it showed that it was a little bit worse than they thought it was originally, because I have kind of an aggressive type of cancer that's more complicated, and that from one mammogram to the next can progress a good bit. And so, and can also exhibit itself without even having anything you can, you know, touch. It was microscopic, but they found it. And so, had surgery a year ago today. So I think it's so exciting that you've invited me.
Yeah, well, what a coincidence.
Here today.
I wasn't aware.
What a coincidence. Yeah, a year ago today, I was, you know, coming out of surgery where they found even more things. So, yeah, so it's just all part of what you do. I like the medical world. I've spent a lot of time in it because I've had older parents. And, you know, I love that I have a cancer center just up the road. Wonderful support from the very beginning.
Yeah,
so
is that where most of your treatment has taken place?
Yeah, just the new cancer center. I started chemo the week before Thanksgiving, and that was weekly for a number of months. And yeah, you just sort of build it into the fabric of your life. The treatments, the fatigue, all that stuff.
Could you describe some of that? I know a lot of people, you know, they hear about it, this dreaded chemo, and they don't really know what exactly goes on, what it's like.
Well, I won't take off my shirt and show you my Portocat. Still have a port because I have the infusion still every 3 weeks. But I was afraid to do chemo. I was afraid because one of my brothers died of cancer in the 70s, back in the early days, and he was so sick. It was just, and I always said, I'll never do chemo. And then as soon as I got my diagnosis, I said, when can I start? I'm ready. They have wonderful drugs now for nausea. They have volunteers who come and sit with you. Your family can go. It's a warm, to me, and cozy room with lots of flowers and little fish, plants. And I had a certain chair I would sit in each time as I bonded with the chemo room, and I would sit in my chair with my chemo tote, which it was a chemo suitcase. You know, you take your hot tea and you make it, I don't know, I nested, I bonded.
So it's not this big, daunting
It wasn't,
scene.
well, it wasn't so, you know, and I had wonderful people to get me there, drive me home. You would feel bad, you can feel bad, but that, fortunately, you know, I was on sabbatical. Radiation was harder, psychologically and physically, I would say, although it was a different kind of fatigue.
You mentioned psychological. What have been some of the more psychologically challenging aspects?
With the cancer, or, well, psychologically challenging. That's a hard question. Well, in an immediate sense, it would be having to be strapped down so that you can't move while a ray is coming into your body, because I was afraid if I'd move. So that's psychologically. But in terms of outside of the chemo room or the radiation room, psychologically, if anything, I guess cancer's made me more cheerful. You know, I'm kind of a cheerful person.
I was about to say, I don't know how much more cheerful you could get. I've had you for a few classes.
It's just been a really good lesson. I still have, you know, you have your times when you cry, and you have your times but you never really have the why me times. You have I had that this was not on my to-do list time, because I'm trying to organize my life. But yeah, it was a surprise, but not a total surprise, and it just sort of wove it into the fabric of my life. I had good support.
Well, that's great. Support is definitely key. And Dr. Mitchell, we want to thank you again
I want
for
to
coming
thank you
on the show.
for inviting me. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure.
And thanks for wearing the pink tie.
Yeah, no problem. It's honestly, the least I could do.
Okay. All right.
Emory Henry College has been educating students for 175 years. To operate this for this long is a remarkable achievement. In our Out and About this week, David St. Clair points to the strong history of the religious life of the college. Brent Treesh from our PR department prepared the story. Here's this week's Out and About.